Okay, now we're beginning. Okay, so you all got a summary right there, right, through the quiz of class 1. And I'm just going to try to boil it down even further so you have something to sort of walk away with. And we'll always return to this foundation. We have to start anytime we're talking about enlightenment or freedom from suffering. We have to start by talking about the truth of suffering, this thing that's around us that we're swimming in. And you could just think what's happened in your life or the lives of people around you between last Tuesday and this Tuesday, right? You talked about that first type of, it's called sometimes obvious, on and off physical and mental suffering. So think about how many instances of that you had just between last week and this week. Or think about the things that have started and ended, right? Maybe you got sick. I know some people got sick. I got emails. Maybe you fell in love or you fell out of love. Or you got injured. Yeah, things happen, and they happen quickly. So even just between a week, where we feel this reality of the suffering. And then if not that, you have the all-pervasive suffering. You have the reality of every single person you've witnessed being subject to getting sick, getting old, and eventually dying. How did that meditation, did anyone do the meditation or contemplation on suffering? What did it bring up?
Did you ask who meditated?
Yeah, nice. What did it bring up?
I can't hear. I'm having a hearing aid.
Oh, okay.
How was it?
Yeah.
It was really interesting. It was just, I'm skeptical of a little bit of it, the idea that death is so horrible. I've been with 3 different people dying. Of course, I haven't died myself, although I've come quite close to I'm just not sure.
Yeah.
But anyway, I just meditated about it, and I meditated about suffering. And then also because of meditating and other things I've done and am doing, I'm aware that partly I'm kind of in some ways addicted to my own suffering. So I was asking myself, why in some ways am I resistant to not suffer? And anyway, I was just trying to be with it, and then every now and then I'd drift and I'd go back to my breath, and then also I just thought a little bit about my heart and then would think about it more.
That's beautiful. Thanks, Tom.
But I can't hear you. I'm ready to
Thank you. Anyone else do the meditation or contemplation? I see some nods. So, it's not, as I said last week, it's not meant to depress you. If anything, when I first heard that explanation of suffering, it felt like I could just breathe finally, because I was like, finally, someone's telling me the truth. Like, someone's just saying it as it is and putting words to this restlessness, this feeling that's always there, right? Or I don't know if I would let my mind go kind of towards death, but not indulge thinking about it because I didn't know how to. And what you brought up was beautiful, Tom, because yes, we talked about last week in the Buddhist view, death, that moment of mind separating from body, is an intense, incredible pain. But that doesn't mean you can't train for that moment. What comes up in that experience for you is a result of everything you've put in that mind up until then. So it could be a different experience. But what we're trying to remember is that we don't know when it's going to happen. So every single moment is a training. Yeah. Right? Yeah, Sarah.
It's interesting to think of those 2 dichotomies of your entire life and death as like kind of equal things. It's like in the past I've thought of death as like just one moment and it's over and that's it. But what you just said, and as I was thinking about it, it's like it really does kind of drive. It's with us our whole lives. We don't know when it will happen. We tend to be afraid of it, and so death is kind of a part of every moment.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah, it's the fierceness of the river. It's propelling us, whether we want to or not. We are just getting pushed every moment. And every moment we're not training and thinking about, okay, am I using this to prepare for death? It's a moment wasted. is what it said. Like my teacher says, you do yoga for 60 minutes. If you're not having some sort of intense motivation, you just wasted 60 minutes of your life, and you're just 60 minutes closer to dying. And it's true. Reality is with us all the time.
What's reality?
The reality that we are hurtling in an intense speed towards a certain death.
Right.
In the condition that we're in right now of
die.
suffering. Yes. Exactly. Okay, but I feel like I hope, and I don't know if we got to this well enough last week, but that like the only positive side of suffering is that it can be understood because it's caused. Let me get through this, and then I'll get back to you. Right? Like this isn't this is the realm we're in. It's a condition that we're in that we can understand because there's a cause to suffering. It doesn't just come out of nowhere. Trees don't just pop up. There's a seed. It grew. Something was planted and it ripened. And suffering works the same way. So there's a lot of ways to think about the causes of suffering, but here's the easiest way. Anytime you are preoccupied with your own happiness, that is the cause of suffering. And anytime you think about how to make others happy, you are closer to freedom. And I'm not saying that to be poetic. There's a logic to that. So anytime you are navigating through the world thinking, I need to get this, it will make me happier, there's a mistake happening. And the mistake that is happening is that we think the power of those things is in the thing. It's called the self-nature, which we alluded to in that passage. But I'll try to make it more concrete. I had a headache earlier, like this afternoon. So I went to a pharmacy. I went to the painkiller section. There's entire painkiller sections in pharmacies, right? Like aisles of painkillers. And I found one that's like the perfect size. It can fit in my bag. But all of them have it's the same stuff. Like it's the same, if you look at the ingredients, it's the same chemical. They're just packaged differently or different colors and have different labels on them. But all of them, if you really start to look, it's the same active ingredient. So why are there so many, first of all? One question. But second of all, every time I take this, what is this? This is off-brand Advil. But every time you take Advil for your headache, does it work?
No.
Right? Every time you try to get happier, get it from a state of unhappiness, headache, to happiness, headache, does it always work? No. And it doesn't for anyone. But it says on the backs of all these pill bottles, active ingredient, ibuprofen, right? And it's a fraction of what's actually in the pills. It's not like the whole thing is ibuprofen. It's this thing in there. So if it's the active ingredient, like why doesn't it always work? Or like one of my dear friends is allergic. So she would die if she had that active ingredient. So what we're talking about here is the active ingredient beneath that active ingredient. What's the thing that makes the active ingredient active?
Believing that it'll work.
So if I just believe that Advil works, it'll work?
Maybe as like a placebo in some sense.
But don't I want something to work all the time? Don't I want suffering to be gone completely all the time?
Yeah, but it's not possible.
It is possible. That's what we're saying. It is possible because the thing that makes that ingredient active is kindness. If I have helped other people in the past be free from headaches, from pain, only then, when I take this pill, which is empty of having a nature, empty of removing headaches, could that thing actually function as pain relief for me? That's what we're saying. The thing that makes it active is the way I've treated others in the past. It's this code in my mind that I've coded my mind with wanting other people to have peace of mind. Or like, I'm crazy, I carry around Tiger Balm and I like give people head massages if like the littlest thing happens. You know this if you've been with me. It's those moments, the awareness I had in those moments, because you always have that with you, the awareness of your mind. You are recording everything. That is the active ingredient that turns on when I take those 2 pills into my mouth. That's what makes headaches go away. So that's what I mean, that every moment of happiness in my life is delivered to me as a result of any time I thought about others. And actually, every suffering I have in my life comes from selfishness, from thinking about myself. And I didn't say that. Master Shantideva said that, who wrote the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. So really relevant for us in this course. And I know it feels maybe inside out or backward somehow, and that's a symptom of ignorance. That's the ignorance we're talking about. The fact that feels like this inside out way of working with the world. That's the mistake in our minds. Really, people that are in accord with reality, no problem. That's how it works. I don't want headaches. I help other people not get headaches. I want a boyfriend. I help other people get the love of their life. Natural law of the universe, cause and effect. It functions in the mind. So that's the truth of the cause of suffering. It's caused, which is cool because if it's caused, if it began, that means it can end. Right? We talked about everything in Buddhism comes born with a self-destruct button in it, including suffering itself. It's a cause thing, so it can end. It can end completely, right? And we were talking here about a couple things. One, this is not like grin and bear it. This is not like placebo effect, right? Of like, I'm going to just wish and think suffering's going to end, so maybe it won't affect me as much. I don't want to see headaches at all. I don't want to see pain and suffering in my world. And so here, what's the key that unlocks this? The end of suffering. If it's true that everything I experience is a result of something I've wished for others, what's the key that ends my suffering completely?
Ending other people's suffering.
Wishing I could end someone else's suffering completely. And then not just someone else, everyone else, without exception, all sentient beings. Do you see that connection? If I have that wish for everyone, completely free of suffering, all beings, anywhere my mind can touch, that's the feeling. What will I be forced to experience as a result?
Less suffering.
No suffering, right? Complete eradication of suffering in my reality, for real, right? Which is why I could be lost in my suffering, but Thomas over there could be completely free from suffering, right? It's a mind thing we're talking about. Is that? And we'll keep talking about it. But and you have to meditate on this. Why would bodhicitta, the wish to get enlightened for all sentient beings, be the thing that unlocks the end of my personal suffering? You have to cook that. But it's the essence of Mahayana Buddhism and of this path to liberation. That's what we're talking about. Enlightenment, it's salvation, it's permanent happiness, it's moksha. That's again, liberation in Sanskrit or Hindi or something. Yeah, it's that. You had your hand up.
Yeah, so you have a headache.
Mm-hmm.
You go to the pharmacy, you get the ibuprofen. In that moment, to keep the wish generating, you can think of yourself as one of the suffering beings, correct? And as you're taking that, wishing that this Advil releases everyone who takes it from suffering.
Totally.
Right? Like that's
Totally. And that's what this practice is about, is like going through the world looking like a normal person. Like it looked like I just went to Walgreens and bought the ibuprofen, but inside, what are you doing? Totally, you can charge that up. May I, as I take these pills, not just remove my headache, but remove the 3 types of sufferings for any being everywhere.
Yeah, because I just didn't want to be thinking about it like, oh, I have a headache, there's nothing out there that's going to change it right now. Or like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, what's cool is that you'll be forced to experience things helping you get to freedom. The more you have this wish. You can't help it. Sometimes maybe it's not going to be the Advil, it's the random cupcake I eat, and that cures my headache. Why? Because I'm curing people's headaches. The delivery method doesn't matter then. It's what's in your mind.
But it requires some type of action, right? Like you can't just do nothing and it'll disappear. You have to.
It requires a karma. So it requires a movement of my mind, that then forces me to experience something that's otherwise empty of a nature to function in a certain way. So yes, if that's your question.
Yeah, cupcake, Advil, whatever.
Sure. Or sitting in meditation. Sometimes it makes you feel good, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah,
My headache went away with yoga.
There you go. Sometimes it
That's
doesn't.
an important point though, because she's not saying that karma's going to cure your cancer and you don't have to go get treatment. You still have to take your meds.
But what's the active ingredient in the meds? Cool. Now, today, this is the whole class today, is now the fourth, these are sometimes, it's mistranslated as the Four Noble Truths. They're the first teaching that the Buddha gave. Like, the Buddha came out of meditation, woken up, and the first thing he said was the truth of suffering, and then proceeded along this way. So the fourth truth there is the truth of the path, that there's a path from point A, schmuck, stuck in suffering, to complete full enlightenment, right? And that path is what today's class is about. The path is not separate from this concept of morality, or this practice of morality. And again, I don't need to convince you of it. I have a verse that will show you the proof of you cannot get enlightened without a practice of morality. So we're going to talk about what that is, because I didn't have a practice of morality before I came here, or I thought it was like this really boring thing that meant that my life was about to get really boring, right? Because there was all this stuff I wouldn't be able to do. And we'll find out that that's not what morality is. It's actually opening your life up to more possibility than you could have imagined. It removes doubt because you know exactly what you could be doing in every situation. And it allows you to operate in accord with the way things really are. So we'll get into that. But that's the truth of the past. So here's another way just to think of class 1, and we'll always return to these ideas. Okay, anything else I want to... Cool, okay. So here's the so what. So we do this at work sometimes. It's like, with the presentation, you have to let the client know, like, what's the so what? Like, why should I care about this? So here's some proof. It's not me just saying think about morality. This is from Je Tsongkapa, who we talked about last week. And anytime we have questions about, like, basically anytime we're like, what's the truth, or what would, we need a trusted source, right? You go to Je Tsongkapa. That's his relationship to what we're studying here. He is the greatest organizer of Tibetan Buddhism, the greatest sort of translator and interpreter, and he's the source that we're going to keep going back to. And so this comes from him, and it comes from a really beautiful text called The Source of All My Good. It's 14 verses. We're looking at verse 8 here, and the way this sort of came to him. So the Je Tsongkapa was also the teacher to the first Dalai Lama. So what we're studying here is in the Gelugpa tradition. It's what monks and nuns study in monasteries still, and it's what His Holiness the Dalai Lama, practices and embodies and teaches. So, source of all my good. The way it's described is that Je Tsongkapa basically had like a 1-month-long LSD trip at a monastery in front of a statue of his teacher. Like, he went into a meditation, and it was trippy, and it lasted a month long. And that's when this came to him, this teaching. And after it, he composed this beautiful 14-verse poem called Source of All My Good. And it's so beautiful. Each verse is packed with meaning, and all 14 of them represent the full path to enlightenment in one lifetime. It's very cool. Cool is not the right word, but it's very profound. So here, this passage sets us up for this class. I'm going to have Allison read it for us.
Sure.
Thanks.
Bless me to see clearly that the wish itself is not enough, for if I'm not well trained in the 3 moralities, I cannot become a Buddha. Grant me then a fierce resolve to master the vows for children of the victors.
Cool, so we're going to do some decoding. This one's a little, more clear than the passage we worked with last week, but still, there's some nuance here. So bless me to see clearly that the wish itself is not enough. What's the wish? Bodhichitta, or the wish to get enlightened for the sake of all beings, right? So this thing we've been talking about is the key to enlightenment. Je Tsongkapa is saying bless me first to see that that's not enough. That actually is, like, that's not the full, maybe, you know, that's not it. For if I'm not well trained in the three moralities, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. What does he mean by the three moralities? Again, morality being this inner practice that you're doing. It's not a list that's fallen from the sky of things we should do and things we should not do. Like, that doesn't serve us to think about it that way. It's not something that you do because it's going to make your teacher happy, or it's going to make your mom and dad happy because you'll be a good girl or boy, or whatever you identify as. It's not about that. So we're going to get detailed. And if I'm not well trained in the three moralities, I cannot become a Buddha. So what's a Buddha? It's someone it's a mind that's Buddha, that's woken up, right? It's really, there's not much I can say. You have to start to develop your own relationship with what that is. But what I invite you to think about is when you see a Buddha here, that doesn't just mean the OG Shakyamuni Buddha, the one that you see in the statues or the paintings, right, from ancient India with the bun on his head. It's not that. It is that. He was the first one, but it's anyone that's had a realization of the way things really work and has done it with ultimate love in their heart, so that they can they're doing it because they want to serve other beings. Ultimate love, ultimate wisdom. Anyone who's woken up to that reality is a Buddha. And that's what we're talking about here. Grant me then a fierce resolve. I like this because it gets back to that idea of, like, bodhisattvas aren't just nice people, right? Like, there's this fierce resolve if you want to become a Buddha, to master the vows, not just study the vows and take the vows, but to become masters of your vows. Like, that's cool, right? It doesn't mean, like, just know them really well. It means know your mind so well that the situation arises and the vow is there to catch you. You master the vows. For the children of the victors. Who are the children of the victors? So it's specifically talking about bodhisattvas, right? So children of the victors, as in bodhisattvas grow up to become Buddhas, is one way to think about it. That's one meaning. The other one, and this is really beautiful, we'll talk about it more next week when we talk all about the ceremony, but there's all these benefits of taking on this wish, like taking on this path. And one of them is that, you know, Buddhas their essence is compassion, right? So they're there anytime anyone needs them. But specifically, those who have promised and vowed with their life to try to do this, they stay close. They look out for you. They're going to keep popping up for you in strangers or in situations. And that's also sort of what that means, children of the victors. Yeah, Sarah.
What if your mind or your body fails you? Like, you have the wish,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but you find that it's seemingly through no conscious, misgiving of yours that you've fallen short. I mean, of course you're going to be compassionate toward yourself, but if you cannot, or you feel that you cannot achieve mastery despite your best efforts, then what? How do you keep from getting discouraged?
Yeah. It's a really nice question. I mean, what comes to mind personally for me is Sangha, or specifically Sangha jewel. So we talk about the three jewels here, right? The third jewel being the Sangha, the community, the other people around you that have taken on these spiritual promises. And they give me the energy to keep going often. That's one way. But it's what you're saying, it's actually a promise that you take. You take a promise to not ever give up the promise, to not ever give up the wish. It's actually something you're promising to do, right? And we talked about all these vows, they all get damaged, they all get broken. So you always have to work with it. But that's part of what you're training for.
Okay.
I don't know if that helps. Yeah.
When I did the little thing about suffering and then dying and suffering, it occurred to me that it seems a little odd, like, well, with enlightenment and all this, why would there be suffering when you're anyway, I think it goes to what you're saying is to keep your vows, no matter, even if you're Buddha, it's a continual, constant thing and a struggle, and some day you might be enlightened, but another day maybe you're just like hanging on barely. But you have the vow, so you keep trying. But, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with what you're saying. It's a daily practice, and yeah, the vows are like this lifeboat you hold on to, right? Dharma is this thing that holds you up. But in terms of when you flip from seeing a suffering world to seeing an enlightened world, that's a permanent switch. Like once you have the realization that turns that on, you actually turn into a different type of being.
So then does the death part no longer an issue?
So I'm going to have you hold on to that because it might resolve itself. It's a really cool question, but I'm not going to get into it now.
How do you know
yeah.
that?
How do I know what?
What you just said.
Yeah, it's what I've been told, what I've been given by teachers. So I don't know it because I've experienced it in any way, but it's the way that's been given to me. Within Buddhism, there's really two types of beings. It's those who see reality for what it really is, and those who are stuck in the appearances of the way things seem to be.
Stuck where?
In appearance and the way things seem to be. And those two types of minds, that's how the world's actually divided. It's not any other division.
That sounds like suffering to me. Haves and have-nots. Striving, that's suffering.
As opposed to?
If I cannot become awake, I am becoming awake. Therefore, I don't have to suffer in the suffering. I don't have as much suffering of suffering.
I do think suffering can start to change as you work with it. But what I try to remember is that if I'm ever I think what you're saying is like when you can experience hardships as like lessons or teachings. Is that what you're referring to?
No.
Okay.
No.
Then maybe I'm missing.
I was just curious about how you knew that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's everything I'm sharing here, I'll try to make it as clear as possible when I'm like adding my just personal experience and practice, but what I'm sharing is what I've been given here. Yeah. Did you want to say something, Rachel?
Yeah, are you talking about death being one way or another way? When you're saying, how do you know that? What is that referring to exactly?
Yeah, the binary. It goes to the question of the woman over here. That where are you as you find yourself almost there, not there? Then you're in suffering. And anytime there's a binary of I either can be or I'm not, you're suffering.
No, because then any distinction at all would cause suffering, and a Buddha couldn't see the difference between darkness and light. It's not a binary that inherently creates suffering, it's karma. And so when Supriya is talking about the shift between a world appearing blissful or not appearing blissful, that's the truth of emptiness. That's the truth of the fact that, there's one object in the room and there's 40 people looking at it and there's 40 different perspectives. It's a very simple proof, actually. It doesn't need to be, have you realized this personally? But like logically, we can assess that, right? Like the pen is a chew toy, and the pen is also a pen. And then logic, we have to follow that logic until we get a direct experience. At least that's what I was hearing. It's always good to, I think, go back to the truth of emptiness until we have a realization.
I'm going to keep going, but I'm going to come hopefully back to that and keep addressing it as much as I can. Okay, that's
Sorry,
just...
before you move on, just a question on what the three moralities are.
That's the next slide. 3 moralities. That's exactly what we're going into. Yeah, so that's just set up, and here we are into the 3 kinds of morality. Okay. First type of morality is the morality of refraining from bad deeds. So, what's a bad deed in Buddhism? It's a synonym for a non-virtue as well.
One that causes suffering.
So a bad deed is something that produces a bad result for us. That's it. That's a simple definition of what a non-virtue or a bad deed is. That when you do it for you, in some future time, you get a result that is not desirable, not pleasurable. So that first type of morality is basically refraining from those types of things that would hurt us and bring us future experiences that are non-desirable. The morality of refraining from bad deeds, it mainly refers to the 10 non-virtues, which we're going to go through. And it also refers to keeping all of your vows, whatever types of vows you have, whether you're an ordained person or not. So that's the first type of morality. So the top 10 non-virtues I want to go over, because really there's a list of 84,000 bad deeds. The top 10 non-virtues are like the heavy hitters, the things that are still around in our minds 2,500 years later from the time that the Buddha taught. And they're the things that come up multiple times a day for us. And see if you agree. 10 non-virtues. The first 3 all pertain to the first 3 of body, or of things that you do, right? So the first one is killing. Pretty obvious. It's in most spiritual traditions and religions. It's saying if you take life in any form, the future result for you will be that your life is somehow harmed. You get sick. You get hurt. You die. And I know this is one that we always kind of gloss over. We're like, okay, well, yeah, I didn't kill anyone today, when you're checking in with yourself. But you have to get more subtle with it. And it was interesting for me. I have a mouse in my apartment. He appeared last week, in between last Tuesday and this Tuesday. An interesting suffering that popped up for me. And so the first thing that mine did when we found out was, okay, glue traps, call my super, how do I get rid of this thing? That's immediately where my mind went. I didn't think about the consciousness of this being as another sentient living being experiencing the world completely validly. I was like, I don't want a mouse in my apartment. Let me get rid of it, right? Does putting the glue trap and trapping all the mice, is that really what gets rid of mouse in my apartment? Could killing ever result in easeful living situation? I see some nods and I see some shakes. But you have to think about it that way, really break it down. It might seem that way. It might seem that I put the traps, I caught the mice, and now I have a clean, beautiful apartment. But what this is saying, the non-virtue there, that there is going to be a future result of me killing a being that I just haven't experienced yet. Because karma grows. It takes time to ripen. So the result I had of being in a mouse-free apartment, which I am in, it was kind of a fast fix for us, luckily, that's a result from something else. That is a result of any time I took care of anyone else's living space, or this space, right? They just happen one after another, like dominoes, and I think that they caused one another, but they don't. I'm going to keep going just because I want to get through, there's a lot of stuff. We're just on the first question. So that's the first one. Killing, what second non-virtue of the top 10? Stealing. And that could be monetary, that could be taking someone's time because you're late, that could be taking someone's attention because you interrupt them, all sorts of things.
This is 3?
This is the first 3 of the 10.
What is that, number 3?
That's number 2. 2 is stealing.
Thank you.
Yep. 3 is sexual misconduct, which is, at its core, it's basically not honoring others' relationships. That's the center of it, but it's like a concentric circle theory, basically, right? The middle of it is sleeping with someone else's sworn partner and rupturing a relationship doing that. But there's versions of it, softer versions of it. Flirting with someone and you don't know whether they are in a committed relationship or not. Or like, I don't know if anyone else does this, you like see someone on the subway and you just start daydreaming a whole future with them. Why am I doing that? I have no idea. Like there's softer versions of that. So that's sexual misconduct. Not honoring other people's relationships. Impossible if I'm trying to create love in my life. So those are the first 3 non-virtues of body. Now 4 of speech. What's the first one? Lying. It's really about anything, concealing anything, lying about anything, but specifically it's lying about your spiritual attainments. Lying about your experiences in meditation or the vows you've taken or anything. That's really what it's referring to, but lying of any. If you want to experience truth and wisdom in your world, get really interested in how truthful that you are with others. Lying, then divisive speech, and then the one following that is harsh speech. So that's 4th and 5th, divisive and harsh speech. Anything that you say that subtly divides people. And like you have to, it is subtle. It's like, did you hear that about so-and-so? It can be that subtle. It's anything of trying to put a wedge between people or existing sort of relationships and communities, and harsh words. Anything that's spoken with an intent to cause harm, harshly. And then the last one of speech is idle talk or gossip, basically. It's like the art of small talk, which our culture loves. But really, what's the result of that? Of like talking about nothing. You're going to hear things and they just won't land for you. It's like, I don't feel anything from this. Idle talk. So that's of body and speech. And now the last 3 are really the kicker, the non-virtues of mind. And so here, the first one is ill will, which is basically thinking for others ill thoughts, or that something terrible would happen to them, or it's anger, or, right? Like it's that sort of thought pattern in your mind, ill will. Second one, sorry?
5?
This is,
Ill will?
this
Or
is
that's still part of
8.
speech? 8?
This is number 8. Number 9 is craving. This one's really interesting because it's essentially the opposite of a bodhisattva attitude. So craving is you see someone getting something and there's that voice in you of like, wait, why didn't I get that? Right? And you do this, or I do this. If friends come up to you, hey, I just got this amazing project at work. You're like, oh, cool. And inside you're like, God, why didn't I get that? Why didn't they tap me for that? It is the opposite of the attitude we're trying to develop of, I want you to not just have the work projects. That's normal samsaric stuff that's gonna end. I want you to have every possible happiness and wisdom in the world. Right? I want you to be completely free of suffering. So you should be, if anything, overjoyed when someone gets the little normal happinesses of life. So craving is the opposite of that. And then the crux of it all, the 10th non-virtue, is wrong view, which has to do with emptiness, as is everything we talk about here. And it's basically going around and not trying to see the emptiness that is truly existing in all things. It's making the mistake. It's thinking that things are out there having some sort of nature and power in them that doesn't have to do with my karma, with the things I've done in the past. Wrong view. And it's important because it's the thing that causes the other 9 non-virtues. If you didn't have that, you wouldn't lie. If you understood perfectly how cause and effect works, you wouldn't lie. You wouldn't steal. Yeah? So 10 non-virtues, and these are like not, they're the perfect sort of vows to start to practice. And anyone can keep these, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But that's all part of the first type of morality of refraining from bad deeds. The second type of morality is the morality of collecting goodness. Collecting is a code word here, and we'll go over what that means. here it really is talking about the 6 perfections. So if you're taking notes, like leave a big area underneath morality of collecting goodness, because we're going to go over the 6 perfections. But right, the first one is I'm going to stop hurting others and hurting myself. And the second one is I'm going to collect something else, something different. It's this power that you start to collect. So we'll talk about that. And then the third morality is the morality of working for all living beings. And the order here is really important. So the logic here is unless you can first train yourself, another word for morality is vinaya, which means training. Unless you can first train yourself in refraining from bad deeds and actually thinking about collecting some goodness, you can't start to work for the sake of all living beings. The way you could think about this is like, think of how much easier it is to think about others when you're not sick or like not going through a breakup or not totally overwhelmed at work, right? It's only in those states that we can actually be there for others and even think about others. So that's part of this, but this order does matter. And so the third morality is basically doing the first 2, but with that wish infused in each action. Of I'm doing this not just for the sake of myself, but this for the sake of everyone else who's in suffering. Okay, so that's the 3 types of morality. We're going to do a little tangent on the 6 perfections because it's so important. It's come up in every class now, and I feel like I haven't gone through it. So we're going to do that. I think we'll be good on time. We'll get a little faster as we go. So this is within that second morality of collecting goodness. So I want to go through these because these 6 perfections are the 6 attitudes that are perfected in a bodhisattva's mind. So it's the things that they're doing all day long. And it's very beautiful. They're mental attitudes. So the first one is the mental attitude of giving. Here it's not giving away the last piece of cake. It's like giving away the best piece of cake. You know, it's not just cake, but it's an attitude of complete generosity. Of anyone who needs anything, I'm there to give it to you. And this makes me think of the experiment that Sarah did like 2 weeks ago and posted about. It was so beautiful because we're asked for things all the time in New York City when you're walking down the street or on the subway. Like I doubt there's a day that's gone by where you haven't seen someone genuinely asking for something they need. And it's the perfection of giving is going around saying, I'm going to give to every single one of those requests, whatever I can. Sarah did that, and it was like, $40 in a month that it took you to actually honor?
6 months, it was an average of $40 a month.
If you actually gave to every single instance that someone asked you. Yeah. It's perfecting that attitude that is the perfection of giving. And ultimately, and they say you start with giving the change in your pocket. You start with giving carrots and potatoes until you can give the most ultimate thing. What's the most ultimate thing you could give someone? It's the logic that would help them understand how to free themselves from their own suffering. It's teaching them cause and effect. It's showing them the emptiness of everything. So it's giving dharma is that said to be the most perfected way of giving. That's perfection 1. Second one is ethics or morality. So that's really important, especially with today's class. And you'll see there the emoji. Some people, I know there's different learning styles. So if you have an emoji learning style, here you go. But this is what I mean. Ethics, the only way I have found it to actually work as a practice is if it's something that you monitor multiple times a day. So the way it's been given to me is it's a 6 times a day practice where you check your mind 6 times. 3 times during the sun, while the sun's up, 3 times while the sun's down. And you're checking yourself along all of so let's say you can start with the 10 non-virtues and the virtues. You just bring your mind back to those things and check. How did I harm life? How did I protect life? And I think this is important because I don't want to get caught in like this being a study of Buddhism or a study of a particular religion or tradition. I think a lot about the answer the Dalai Lama once gave when someone asked him, like, how could you how could you be this bearer of religion when it's created so many problems in the world? Like, it's divided so many people, it's caused so much harm and pain, right? And he said, well, religion isn't like divisions like this of like, oh, well, you have Buddhists and then you have Hindus and you have Christians. And it's not like slicing it that way. It's slicing it this way. And you have here people who practice something, and over here you have people who don't. And that's what a 6 times a day book does. Are you practicing or are you not? Are you watching your mind or are you not? And if you've tried to keep a book, you know, like it's hard, and maybe you keep it for the first few days and then it sort of trails off. But it's the best thing I can think of. It can become really fun. It's the best thing I can think of to actually practice. Because you can tell yourself, oh, I'll just check in with my mind 6 times. And it's probably not going to happen. That's my experience anyways. So once you get really good at keeping your morality, watching your mind, what naturally starts to arise in the mind is patience. And patience is again a mistranslation, or just something that it doesn't capture what it really is. The emojis do, which is not getting angry. Not getting angry even when you should is actually what it said. Like, even when you're in the exact situation where someone's screaming at you, even then not getting angry. That's the third perfection of patience. I'm not going into too much detail with all of them. I just want to give them all to you. The fourth one is joyful effort. Joyful effort is fun, and it doesn't just mean being happy all the time. It means having this like zest for doing virtue. Okay, so if non-virtue is something that results in an undesirable thing for you, what's virtue? Anything that you are then forced to experience as pleasure, as something good. So joyful effort is becoming like a junkie about virtue, about collecting virtue, about doing these kinds of deeds that will result in the types of things you want to see in the world. That's joyful effort. Feeling good about doing good things. If you do that enough, and they all lead to each other, if you do all this enough, you get to concentration or meditation. And it's completely connected. You want a clearer, sharper meditation practice? Go back to your morality. They're completely connected. Prove it. Start to take an inventory of the thoughts that you're battling when you're in meditation. If you're anything like me, it's the things you said that you wish you hadn't. It's the things you said you would do, but you didn't do. It's that's the stuff that's coming back and haunting you, right? Those are the things that you're swatting away in meditation. Clean up your morality. That is the cause for perfect meditation. Why? Because morality is taking care of other people's minds, is going around the world remembering that everyone has a mind and that you affect each other. And when you work with morality, you are caring about people's peace of mind, so you're forced to have a peaceful mind, a mind that can concentrate and meditate. And that leads to the kicker, which is wisdom. Wisdom is always a code word for the emptiness of things, the fact that things aren't the way we think they are, or they seem to be, or they appear to be. It's not that they don't exist, it's that they exist only in that they are a projection forced on us by our karma, by things we've said, thought, and done. And that's the only way things really function. That logic it's that logic that separates being lost in suffering and for real creating an enlightened paradise. So that's that. And why am I saying this? It's going back to, remember, this is the second morality of collecting goodness. Collecting means 2 really specific things. And that's why I just went through this whole list. Collecting means collecting merit and collecting wisdom. The collection of merit is the first 4 perfections. And it said that that mass of energy that they create, those first 4 perfections, results in the body of a Buddha, the body of an enlightened being. And I love this. I love thinking about, like, okay, if you got so good at giving anyone, anywhere that needs anything, of course you'd be forced to experience in the future a body that could emanate on countless planets as whatever was needed. Right? Can you, like, if you take that to the nth degree, it's connected. So collection of merit, first 4 perfections resulting in the body of a Buddha. And the last 3, so joyful effort is in both, which is kind of cool, but results in the mind of a Buddha, the collection of wisdom. The main quality here is omniscience, of an enlightened mind, that you could know everything, every detail of everything. But what's important about that, it's not just like you know every detail about how the car works. It's you can read people's minds so that you can help them. So you know particular to them what they need to do and what they need to stop doing. That's the purpose of omniscience. Why else be omniscient? So the last 3 perfections give you this collection of wisdom that creates the mind of a Buddha. So this should start to be like, okay, cool, morality is like pretty sexy. It's like, this is what morality is doing. It's literally this second morality of collecting goodness is giving you the causes to actually this body changing into an enlightened body, and this mind changing completely into an enlightened mind. That's the code behind collecting, right, in that second morality. And then we talked about the third morality, right? Doing all of that for the sake of all beings. You can give just to give, or you can give for the sake of all beings. There's a difference. Okay, so now, I don't want to confuse you, but this is another set of 3 things, 3 sets of vows. It's different from the 3 kinds of morality. Different but related. Yeah? And that's where we're going next.
Does the morality play into all 3 sets of vows?
Yeah. You can think about it that way. Like, morality is the full choreography, and vows are the steps. You can think about it that way. Like, they don't fit exactly one on top of each other. But for example, the first morality of refraining from bad deeds, that just means you keep all your vows, whatever vows you have. So that's what we're talking about here. What are all the vows that are available to you?
So when we come to 3 jewels and we meditate, how does that fit into this vow matrix? Does it go to like the tantra time that you're going to cover in the future? I don't know.
We're going to go through all of these in detail. So that should become clear as we go on. Can you just keep that in your mind? And if I don't answer it, bring it up again. But we're going to go through each of these. Yeah?
And they're sequential, for sure? Like
They are. Yeah, so we'll go over that. Yeah, so exactly. You start with individual freedom vows. Those are a prerequisite to take Bodhisattva vows, which are a prerequisite for tantric vows. Yes, that is true. That the order does matter. So let's go through them now. So the first one's individual freedom vows, or pratimoksha vows. You might have heard of them that way. That's the first set of vows. They're called individual freedom. It's very simple. The individual who takes these vows can reach freedom. The individual who does not take these vows cannot reach freedom. No one can free you. So this set of vows is you taking personal responsibility for the truth of suffering in your life and saying, I'm going to do something about it individually. So they're also called lifetime vows. They expire at the time of death. And I'll give you an overview of them now, and then we're going to go into each in detail. What type of question is it, Zoe?
I guess that makes me think that only Buddhists who know about this individual freedom vow list are able to get free. So what about people who aren't Buddhists?
Yeah, the way I think about that is like the difference between spiritual traditions or traditions meant to free you. It's basically vocabulary and ritual or tradition. So because of emptiness, there could be a practice in another tradition which is not called this, and maybe doesn't even look like this, but could absolutely validly free you. Why? Because the thing that frees you is just like the Advil. The active ingredient in it, isn't out there self-existently in that thing. It has to do with the mind that's working with it. So you could be forced to have an experience of something else completely functioning in this way for you.
Can I answer your question?
I have a rebuttal here. Or an answer. Can I hear it? Can the class
Yes,
hear it?
go for it.
I read a quote somewhere that said, all religions are precious jewels on a golden string of divinity.
Say it louder for the people in the back.
I read a quote somewhere that all religions are precious jewels on a golden string of divinity.
On a golden string of?
Divinity.
Oh, beautiful.
So, just like what you were saying.
And it's really beautiful because once we get into the vows, there are specific vows about how we judge other traditions, in that we should not. That we cannot, actually. And that applies to within the Buddhist practice, because there's different practices within Buddhism. Right? We talked about that last week, those with the goal of nirvana, personal enlightenment, just being free from all mental afflictions, a very high goal, or those striving for full enlightenment. And it applies to any other tradition that we see validly making other people, or providing other people an experience to be more kind, to understand where their world comes from, to work with cause and effect, the way it actually functions. That's what makes something a religion.
It's like I get what you mean with the,
It's the people who practice or the people who don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can see it in that perspective.
It's not about becoming a Buddhist. That's not what this class is about. That's not what 3 Jewels is about. This gives you, what was cool about this is this gave me a path. Like, this gave me an instruction manual. It's like, cool, okay, I want to do that. Now what do I do? Here's what you do. Here's what you can do. Okay, so that's individual freedom vows. Then you have Bodhisattva vows, which is what this whole course is about. And starting, not next week, but the week after, we're actually going through all of these, right? 18 plus 46, 64 Bodhisattva vows. And I do want to add here, because this is question 4 on your homework, it's going to ask you, like, why are there 2 divisions of Bodhisattva vows? And it's kind of, so it's one of those things where it's basically just saying it's the authoritative source here was the Buddha, that those are the only 2 divisions. I think this is like to give you context. At the time of the Buddha, there were people talking about other types of divisions, like, oh, there's 3 or 4 divisions of Bodhisattva vows. And really, there's just 2. You start with the root vows, and if you break any of those in a minor way, it becomes a secondary vow. And we'll get into so much more detail with that, but just so you're clear, there's 2 divisions of Bodhisattva vows. Why? That's what the authoritative scripture by the Buddha proclaimed. Okay. Bodhisattva vows stay with you across lifetimes, so that's something to consider. And I know we've talked about, ACI, we have a whole course on past and future lives, something that I recommend meditating on and sort of keeping on your spiritual shelf. I'm not asking you to believe in past and future lives, but I am asking you to consider what happens to the mind when the body ends, which it inevitably does. Do we have any proof that the mind actually does end at that moment too? So,
Actually, what?
Does the mind actually end when the body ends?
Do we have proof? What is you asked?
I'm asking, yeah.
I'm
just saying, for those who maybe like past and future lives feels weird, you could ask yourself that, well, okay, do I have any proof that the mind does end completely? Like, you could just, it's a contemplation. But I'm just saying, cook it. It's part of Bodhisattva vows that they stay with you across lifetimes. Also, these are important because they're the only vows you can really study, which is what we're going to be doing. That's the whole point of this course. And then tantric vows, we'll get more into that, but that has to do with the secret practices, the secret teachings of Buddhism versus sutra, which is what we're talking about now, open teachings. And those are really like more subtle levels. So if you think about these, another way that helps me, like a visual, individual freedom vows are like those big rocks that you're getting out of the path. Your bodhisattva vows are sort of the finer, smaller things. And then tantric vows, it's like brushing dust, they say. It's very subtle, very powerful as well. We'll talk about it a little bit more later on. So 3 different sets of vows. And now, so do you see them in the corner there? We're just going to go into a little more detail about each of them, starting with individual freedom vows. So, there are 7 types. You see them here. And you can see most of these are actually designed for an ordained life, right? You have the fully ordained monk, fully ordained nun, intermediate, and so on. Yeah.
Why isn't there an intermediate?
Yeah, I don't know, but it is interesting here. The tradition of fully ordained nuns and intermediate nuns is broken in Tibet because in order to like do the ceremony to actually create a nun, you need a certain number of ordained nuns, and they just don't exist anymore. So that lineage has actually been broken in Tibetan Buddhism.
There's not enough nuns.
There's not enough nuns to ordain a new nun.
Let's bring it back.
It's really cool because, like, for me, this stuff totally reframed how I thought of nuns and monks. I mean, I always thought they were really cool. Like, they just seemed like cool people to me and not necessarily boring people or restrained people. But now they're even cooler to me because they're, like, people that are so steeped in this wish that they're just like, yeah, I'm not really interested in the worldly stuff. Like, I'm... Can you imagine someone who is so turned on by this that they would change their entire life? Like, I'm not. I think about it a lot, but as becoming a nun, I mean. But no, so we have the options 6 and 7, lifetime vows for a male lay person or female lay person. So those are individual freedom vows that you take for the duration of your life.
Is it different for men versus women, what the actual vows are?
It's actually not. The actual list of vows is not different, but they are delineated. That might have to do with something in the ceremony, but what they actually are is not different. It is different for nuns and monks. There's like over 300 for a nun, and there's only over 200 for a monk.
I have a cross-traditional question about 6 and 7.
Okay, I might not be able to answer
It's
it,
okay, but
I'll
I
try.
think it's the best way you can express it. So my dad is a Seventh-day Adventist, and that wasn't always true. Like, it happened when I was a child that he chose to take that path. So I don't know that he took vows per se, but one of the precepts he follows is that Saturday is a day of rest for him, and that was a very serious thing. And by doing that, he pursued his, wish for individual spiritual freedom and the practice of that. But it felt like it hurt the people around him, being my mother, my sister, and me, because we couldn't do things on Saturdays. So similarly, if you were taking these lifetime vows to help yourself attain individual freedom, how do you keep that from, I know emptiness and all the rest, but how do you keep that from harming the people around you, or even the perception of harm? How much of it is on them to adapt?
Well, the only way you could see people adapting in your world is if you've adapted in the past, right? So that's one thing. But I think it's beautiful that we get to work with these vows while being in the world. So the ordained life is a choice of removing yourself in a certain way from the world and practicing these things. We have the option, and it's actually, a bodhisattva is someone who's in the world. That's part of the practice. So you're working with that. But the motivation is always to make people feel happy, ultimately. To not weird people out, to not put them, to make them feel uncomfortable.
Right.
So that's the essence of, then that's what you have to work with. And that's what's so cool is that we get to study these things. Because when you first read the vow, it might be something which makes you feel like you need to act a certain way and maybe alienate others. But that's not the point. So we're going to get detailed about.
Or if one action makes one person happy and the person in the same room makes them unhappy, and you feel like you can't please both people at the same time.
Yeah, and remember, being a bodhisattva isn't being a people pleaser. It's understanding exactly what someone needs to move closer to their enlightenment and giving that to them.
Right.
So we'll get to that. There is an 8th one, which is basically taking any of those for a day, which I think is really cool. Like, you could just live your life like a nun for a day and see if you can do that. It's like a little retreat. But basically, to Sarah's question earlier, you do need to have received at least one of these sets of vows, before even requesting Bodhisattva vows. And we'll talk next week about requesting and why you need to request Bodhisattva vows. But at the very least, and this is why we went over them, you need to be refraining from the 10 non-virtues. And if you don't want to think about it in a negative way, just think you need to get obsessed with doing the 10 virtues, right? All of those that we talked about have an opposite. It's not killing, instead protecting life. It's not lying, it's instead speaking your truth completely. It's not ill will, it's being ridiculously happy for other people when they get what they want. So you can think about it that way. And that's a prerequisite. That's what you do in your 6 times a day book to even qualify for wanting Bodhisattva vows, which is the next piece here. And so here we're going to talk about 4 wonderful qualities of Bodhisattva vows. They have to do with why we're vowing to do this stuff. Like, why make a promise? Why not just say, okay, I want to act like a bodhisattva. This is what I'll do. Like, why are we making a promise in our mind? What's the energy of a promise? And they say there's 4 ways to think about it. So the first one is the fact that your Bodhisattva vows are taken from someone else, right? So someone has to give you the vows, and ideally, the person who's giving you the vows is someone who you see practicing them, but practicing them in a way that it makes their life better. Like, I don't know, if you hang around the 3 jewels enough, you'll see this, hopefully, of people, it's very weird, like they'll just take out their books at random times and be checking their vows and keeping their morality. But at the same time, they're having more fun. They're bringing more joy to people that seem to be making their life better. Things are just happening to them. They seem to have time. They seem to have all the opportunities they want. So the idea is you're taking it from a teacher, these vows. You're not just taking it from anyone. And so one of the qualities that makes them powerful is this idea of, if I were to break them, what would this person think? So it's this, the word in Tibetan translates to shame, which is different from guilt. There's no word for guilt in Tibetan. Shame is a very specific feeling of people whose you care about how they perceive you, and that thought stops you from acting in a certain way. Yeah? Shame. Versus, this is another thing that makes Bodhisattva promises powerful, is this idea of consideration, which is like your own conscience. It's the reason you don't take your roommate's food even when they wouldn't ever find out. You stop yourself, right? It's that internal conscience. And that has to do with also the pure intention with which you took those vows. So I'm really excited for next week to actually talk about the ceremony, but it's that what you're really going for with that whole thing is to just, if you could really for a moment experience bodhicitta, it's liberating. It's like the whole spiritual practice is in many ways designed to actually give you a real moment of that. Because you can't go back. Once you feel that and once you feel how good it is, there's nothing else like it. And that pure intention, which you cultivate as you ask for these vows, and hopefully in the ceremony, that keeps you from breaking the vows as well. It makes the promises really powerful because when you get close to them, you have this internal sort of mechanism that stops you. And that's called consideration, conscience. Yeah? So really important. And that's different, right? Like when you promise something to yourself versus it's just on your to-do list, you're heightened about it, right? It's like this alertness that's in your mind. That's the quality that it's creating here. Then, sorry?
What was the very last thing you said?
I said that's the quality it's creating here of like it's heightening it in your mind. It's making it this more charged, important thing, right? It's why you pinky promise, or that's why you take marriage vows. I think I don't know. Not all traditions have. My parents didn't take vows, but I'm assuming that's why you do it. It's like it's different from just saying that I promise to love you forever. It's I'm going to vow to do it. So yeah, maybe that holds things off. The third reason promises are powerful or wonderful quality about Bodhisattva vows is that they are fixable. So they can be repaired. They can even be retaken. And we'll talk about it. I think there's a whole class on how to repair vows. So that's a great quality of a promise. And I actually want to say here, so this list comes from Master Asanga. and it's from Master Asanga's Levels of the Bodhisattvas. And what's cool here is if you don't have number 2 in place, it's actually said that you don't even get the vows. Like if you don't have a pure intention when you're taking the vows, they don't even form in your mind stream, right? Like vows aren't they're not a physical thing. This is a cool contemplation to have. What's the substance of a vow? I know, it's complicated, so we're not going to get into it now, but it's a really cool meditation to do. But the number 2 is really important here, because if you don't have that pure intention, if any part of you is doing it to look good to others, to do it because all your friends are doing it, to do it because you think it'll make your teacher happy, the vows aren't even taking root in your mind. So that's kind of cool. Then they can be fixed. And then the 4th quality is they don't have to be broken in the first place if you really have 1 and 2 in place strongly. So it's like these self-check mechanisms for these promises, right? That like you don't even have to worry about breaking them. And it's not a worrying thing. Once you get these vows, it's very cool. It's like a gift. Like, oh, I get to do this stuff. Not I have to do it. It completely opens up your world. Trying to see if there's anything else I have.
Why is shame in quotation marks the number 1? I think I missed
Yeah, so I put shame and consideration in quotation marks because they're the direct translations from Tibetan words. So like there's a Tibetan word for shame, which is what that first quality refers to. Of promises are important because since you take them from another person who you respect, you would have shame if you broke it. Right? Vows are important or are strong because you have this pure intention when you took them, so you have consideration or a conscience that would stop you if you were getting close to breaking it. These are like the 4 things that shield you, basically, or like the shields that promises give you that make them stronger than just saying you're going to do it. Okay. We're almost there. Actually, we'll be right on time. So those are Bodhisattva vows, and then finally, tantric vows. So this pertains to a homework question. I can't say too much about secret practices because they're secret, obviously. But the way they're secret is, this is the way that helps me. Remember when you were studying algebra? I don't know, whatever grade you were in, right? If someone were to come and give you a calculus textbook, you'd open it, you probably would even be able to recognize some of the symbols and the equations and all. But the beauty and the logic of calculus is secret to a mind that's just learning algebra. And that's the way Tantra is secret. It's a self-kept secret. It's not like guarded somewhere. It's guarded in people's minds and hearts because it doesn't make sense unless it's on top of the foundation of individual freedom vows and bodhisattva vows. It's going to seem weird. It's going to seem like it won't make sense. And that's what this question actually pertains to. So the question is, it's funny that this was even the case 2,500 years ago, but the question is, what do we make of all these weird esoteric tantric practices? Is it true that once you've entered this secret higher way, you can throw out the rest of your vows? You don't have to act with morality anymore. You're doing the secret stuff. You're doing the higher stuff. So that's the question, is like, how do we regard that? And it comes from Je Tsongkapa directly. So this is what he says on the misconception that tantric practitioners can disregard and forget about their first 2 sets of vows. He says, that idea, that wrong idea, cuts the roots of the Buddha's teachings and is like a great rain of hail that destroys the tender crops of the happiness of all living kind. It reflects a total failure to grasp both the higher and lower teachings, an absolute misconception that should be thrown away like so much garbage. I think this is really cool. It comes from Je Tsongkapa himself, and it should clear away in our minds any mistake that somehow advanced practice means you don't need to do your 6 times a day book, that you don't need to think about morality of killing or stealing or gossiping. That's not the case. This clears that up for us.
You could have just said no.
He could have, but I like so much garbage. It's my favorite line. So yeah, I mean, the point of this class, like I know we haven't even gotten to the Bodhisattva vows yet, but I do think it's important because this class shows you sort of where they fit into your full spiritual career, right? They're just one of the many types of vows available, but they're a foundation for the thing with Tantra is that it's the practice that will free you in one lifetime. They say it's like the power of an atomic bomb. Which means the power, like it has that type of power to free you or destroy you. You have to know how to work with it. And so that's what the Bodhisattva vows are a foundation for, and the individual freedom vows are a foundation for that. So you're sort of getting that full scope. I'm trying to think. That's what I have in terms of your question. I wanted meditation.
Yes, like how does meditation fit into?
Yes. So I would think about meditation fitting in because it's the fifth perfection, right, of concentration. So that fits into the second morality of collecting goodness. So meditation is a type of morality, and this is why. If you're actually meditating single-pointedly on an object, the idea is, the next thing you should ask yourself is, what is that object going to be, right? Because you can't actually meditate on nothingness. We're not, and you know this, if you come here, none of our meditations are about clearing away all your thoughts, so you're not thinking. So you'll notice all the meditations we have, the idea is that it puts a virtuous object in front of your mind. An object that if you were to pay attention to it and bring yourself back to it over and over again, it will produce a desirable result for you. And so in that way, meditation is like a morality, right? Because you're infusing your mind with something virtuous. But then as you keep going, like higher states of meditation, they say are moralities because you're not able to plant a bad deed when you're in meditation. For example, when you're peak meditation state, when you're actually meditating on emptiness, on the way things really are, it's impossible to plant any sort of ignorance in that moment because you're with wisdom. Your mind is reflecting back the highest wisdom. So ignorance can't reflect back wisdom. It doesn't work that way. So in that way, meditation is also a morality. And I do think it fits into it. Someone asked that question in a previous version of this class being taught, like, is a daily meditation practice a prerequisite for taking vows? Like, is it a requirement? And the answer my teacher gave was, like, it's not technically written anywhere, but what's cool is once you start to keep your morality, meditation becomes a joy because you're working with your mind. It's really nice to meditate with a mind that's steeped in morality. It's much quieter. It's much easier to hold virtue. So in that way, it's totally involved. Cool? So I was hoping, a lot of this class is to basically start to get you to reframe the word morality. I don't know what that was for you when you came in, but for me, it's very cool to see it as this thing that's linked to how my body and my mind are going to change from this into something enlightened, right? It's very cool that it's not this thing of, oh, here are a bunch of things I wanted to do that I can't do anymore, and more, here's how to live your life in this inside-out, seemingly upside-down way, which is actually in accord with the way things really are. Like, I don't want for a second to doubt that Advil only works because of kindness. That's the way I want to live in the world. Like, there's no other way to live. Morality gives you the training, the playground to start to live that way. It opens up your world so that you are forced to experience bliss. That's what morality is. It's not a list of things you can't do or a list of things you should do. Okay? That's all I've got. We're going to give it away. Now, Yeah, so what we're doing now is thinking about any moment in this class that you felt sweet or opened your mind in some way or changed the way you thought about something, and you're going to try to think of someone else who could benefit from that. And if you're used to doing that, make it bigger. Give it away in a bigger way to anyone, anywhere, caught in this mistake and yearning for a permanent happiness. Sarah, when you're ready.